The silent arrival of the Kethany Empire had never known defeat. For 3,000 standard years, their crimson fleets had carved through space like blades through silk, claiming system after system with ruthless efficiency. Their ships were works of art and destruction combined, sleek vessels that gleamed like blood-red jewels against the black of space. Each hull bore the spiral mark of conquest, etched deeper with every world that fell beneath their banner. Admiral Xiphon stood on the command deck of the Dominance Eternal, his 4 arms clasped behind his back as he gazed through the massive viewport at the small blue world before them. Earth hung there like a fragile marble, unaware that its time had come. The preliminary scans had been almost insulting in their simplicity. Primitive chemical rockets, basic satellite networks, and military technology that barely qualified as crude. The humans had not even achieved proper interstellar travel. The bridge crew worked with practiced efficiency around him. Navigation officers plotted bombardment patterns, while communications specialists prepared the standard surrender broadcast. Weapons crews ran final diagnostics on plasma cannons that could boil oceans and antimatter torpedoes that could crack continents. Everything proceeded according to protocol, just as it had for the previous 47 worlds they had claimed to cycle. Lieutenant Corvus approached with a tactical assessment, his scaled hide shimmering with nervous energy. The young officer had only recently been assigned to the Dominance Eternal, having served aboard smaller vessels during minor pacification campaigns against asteroid mining colonies and trade stations. This was his first planetary conquest, and Xiphon could sense his eagerness to prove himself worthy of the Empire's trust. The assessment confirmed what they already knew. Earth possessed no orbital defense platforms, no energy shields protecting major population centers, and no fleet capable of challenging even their smallest escort vessels. Their most powerful weapons appeared to be fusion devices that could destroy cities but posed no threat to shielded starships. It would be over within hours, perhaps less if the humans proved wise enough to surrender immediately upon seeing the futility of resistance. Xiphon activated the communication array and began the ritual that had brought countless worlds into the Empire's embrace. His voice carried across all frequencies, translated into every language their sensors had detected on the planet below. The message was simple and had never required modification. Submit immediately and be absorbed into the Empire as productive. Citizens, or resist and face extinction. They had one planetary rotation to decide. The response was immediate and puzzling. Instead of the expected panic, the pleading transmissions, or the defiant broadcasts that usually followed such ultimatums, Earth simply went quiet. Not the silence of a dead world, for their sensors still detected bustling activity across the surface. Cities continued functioning, transportation networks remained active, and communication signals flowed between population centers. But none of it was directed outward toward the Kethany fleet. Hours passed without acknowledgement. Xiphon found himself pacing the command deck, his talons clicking against the polished metal floor. In his centuries of service, he had encountered every possible response to the Empire's arrival. Some worlds immediately surrendered, recognizing the hopelessness of their situation. Others fought desperately, throwing everything they had against the inevitable. A few had even attempted negotiation, offering tribute or alliance in exchange for their independence. But none had simply ignored them. The silence began to affect the crew. Navigation officers glanced nervously at their instruments, wondering if their communication systems had somehow failed. Weapons specialists ran repeated diagnostics, confirming that their targeting systems remained locked onto major population centers. Even the usually confident communications team seemed unsettled by the lack of response from the world below Dot as the deadline approached. Xiphon prepared to give the order that would demonstrate the Empire's seriousness. A single antimatter torpedo into an uninhabited region would serve as an adequate warning, while leaving the majority of the planet's infrastructure intact for eventual integration. The targeting coordinates were already locked, the weapon armed and ready. All that remained was his command. Then something appeared on their sensors that should not have existed. The object materialized without warning, emerging from what there? Instruments registered as empty space near the edge of the system. It had not traveled through hyperspace, for their sensors would have detected the characteristic energy distortions. It had not approached from beyond sensor range, for there, long-range arrays covered dozens of light years in all directions. One moment there was nothing, and the next moment there was a ship, but calling it a ship felt inadequate. The vessel defied easy categorization, its form seeming to shift and flow like liquid metal given structure and purpose. It was enormous, easily 3 times the length of the Dominance Eternal, yet somehow appeared to occupy less space than it should. The hull reflected no light, absorbing photons like a void in space, while strange energies danced across its surface in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Lieutenant Kovas attempted to run standard identification protocols, but the computers returned error messages. The object's composition did not match any known materials in their databases. Its energy signature fluctuated in ways that suggested technologies far beyond anything in the Empire's arsenal. Most disturbing of all, active scanning attempts seemed to simply disappear upon contact with the vessel's hull, absorbed without trace or reflection. The mysterious ship took position between Earth and the Kephani fleet, not in an aggressive posture but simply present, like a guardian that had decided to pay attention. No weapons were visible on its hull, no obvious threat displays or intimidating broadcasts. It merely existed, radiating a quiet confidence that made the Empire's crimson warships seem suddenly small and fragile by comparison. Zephan opened a communication channel, directing his transmission toward the unknown vessel. Standard diplomatic protocols demanded identification and statement of intent. The Empire had procedures for encounters with unknown civilizations, though such meetings had become increasingly rare as their influence expanded. Most spacefaring races had either joined willingly or been absorbed through conquest. The response came not as words, but as a simple data packet, transmitted on frequencies the Kephani had never encountered before. Their translation system struggled with the format before finally resolving the message into comprehensible terms. It was brief, almost casual in its tone, as if the sender was discussing weather rather than the fate of worlds. This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the Earth Defense Ship Serenity's Edge. You are trespassing in protected space. Please state your business or depart immediately. The message contained implications that sent ripples of confusion through the bridge crew. Earth Defense Ship suggested an organized military presence, something their intelligence had completely failed to detect. The casual tone implied confidence, perhaps even superiority. Most puzzling of all was the ship's name, which seemed to suggest concepts of peace and boundaries rather than the typical aggressive designations favored by most military vessels. Zephan responded with the Empire's standard first contact protocol, explaining their sovereignty over this region of space and Earth's new status as an imperial possession. He detailed the benefits of joining the Empire willingly and the consequences of continued resistance. The message was comprehensive, covering everything from resource allocation to population management, delivered with the authority of 3,000 years of successful expansion. Captain Vasquez's reply was even briefer than her first transmission. Negative. This system is under Earth protection. You have 15 minutes to withdraw beyond the heliopause or face defensive measures. The audacity was breathtaking. A single vessel, regardless of its impressive appearance, issuing ultimatums to an entire battle fleet. Zephan's tactical displays showed 47 ships of various classes, from nimble destroyers to massive dreadnoughts. The combined firepower at his disposal could sterilize entire star systems. Yet this human captain spoke as if she held the superior position in the confrontation. Lieutenant Kovas suggested launching a probe to gather more detailed information about the mysterious vessel. Perhaps its impressive appearance masked less formidable capabilities. Many primitive civilizations had developed elaborate bluffs and deceptions to compensate for their technological limitations. The probe would reveal the truth behind the facade. The probe lasted exactly 3 seconds after launch. It simply ceased to exist, not destroyed by visible weapons fire, but somehow unmade at the quantum level. The sensor readings were impossible to interpret, showing the probe's matter and energy signature simply stopping as if it had never been created. No debris remained, no energy discharge marked its passing. One moment it was there, accelerating toward the human ship, and the next moment it was not. The 15-minute deadline approached with uncomfortable speed. Zephon found himself facing a decision that had never been required in his long career. Every instinct honed by centuries of conquest suggested that the human vessel represented a threat beyond his fleet's ability to handle. But the Empire's reputation demanded action. To withdraw without engaging would invite questions about Imperial strength that could spread throughout their territory like a plague dot as the final seconds ticked away. He prepared to give the order for a full assault. If the human ship possessed truly advanced capabilities, they would discover them quickly. If it was an elaborate bluff, the Empire would claim another world for their expanding domain. Either way, the universe would witness the resolve of the Kethani Empire. The order never came. As the deadline expired, Serenity's Edge simply turned to face them directly, and every weapon system aboard every ship in the fleet went silent simultaneously. Asterisk. Demonstration. The silence that fell over the Kethani fleet was not the quiet of deactivated systems, but something far more profound. Every weapon, from the smallest point defense laser to the massive planet-cracking antimatter cannons, remained powered and operational according to their diagnostic displays. Yet none would respond to firing commands. The trigger mechanisms simply would not engage, as if the concepts of violence and destruction had been temporarily removed from the universe. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of Serenity's Edge, watching the alien fleet through sensors that could peer into individual atoms if necessary. Her crew worked with quiet efficiency around her, monitoring systems that represented humanity's greatest achievement and most carefully guarded secret. She was a career officer who had spent decades preparing for this moment, though she had hoped it would never come. The ship around her hummed with technologies that pushed the boundaries of physics itself. Serenity's Edge was not built for war in the traditional sense, but for protection through understanding. Its hull incorporated metamaterials that could manipulate space-time at the quantum level, while its power systems drew energy from carefully controlled interactions between dimensions. Most importantly, its consciousness interface systems allowed the ship to interact directly with the neural patterns of any sentient beings within its operational range. Elena opened a channel to Admiral Zephan, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had spent years dealing with complex interstellar situations. She could see the confusion and growing fear on his bridge through sensors that penetrated his ship's hull as easily as looking through clear glass. The Kethani were predators, she knew, but they were also intelligent beings capable of learning when properly motivated. Admiral Zephan, she began, using his name and rank to demonstrate the extent of her knowledge about his fleet. I apologize for the weapons disruption, but it seemed necessary to prevent any unfortunate misunderstandings. Your empire has built its reputation on superior firepower, but that approach won't work here. Would you like to see why? The question was delivered with such casual confidence that several bridge officers aboard the Dominance Eternal visibly flinched. Zephan's 4 arms trembled with barely controlled rage, but beneath his anger, Elena could sense something else growing. Fear was not an emotion that Kethany experienced often, and it made them dangerous in unpredictable ways. Zephin's response crackled with frustrated authority. He demanded immediate restoration of his weapon systems and threatened consequences. That would span generations if his demands were not met. The Empire had never been defied so completely, and he would not allow some primitive world to set a precedent that might encourage resistance elsewhere. Elena listened patiently to his threats before responding with a gentle sigh. I understand your position, Admiral, but you're operating under some significant misconceptions about humanity. Let me provide a brief demonstration of our actual capabilities. She nodded to her tactical officer, a young man named David Chun, who had been born in space and raised among the technologies that made Serenity's Edge possible. His fingers danced across controls that existed as much in quantum probability space as in physical reality, preparing a display that would hopefully end the confrontation without further escalation. The demonstration began subtly. Every ship in the Kethany fleet suddenly found itself perfectly clean, with hull maintenance issues that had accumulated over years of space travel instantly corrected. Scratches from micrometeor impacts vanished. Energy conduits optimized themselves for peak efficiency, and life support systems began operating at theoretical maximum performance. It was a gift of restoration that would have taken months of dock time and millions of credits to achieve through conventional means, but the demonstration was far from over. Elena's voice continued across the communication channel, calm and educational in tone. Your empire has impressive industrial capabilities, Admiral. I can see the craftsmanship in your vessels and the dedication of your crews. But you've focused so heavily on conquest that you've neglected other possibilities. Let me show you what we've discovered when we turned our attention to creation rather than destruction. The space around the Kethany fleet began to shimmer with new possibilities. Floating gardens materialized in the vacuum, their exotic plants somehow thriving without atmosphere or soil, while generating their own miniature ecosystems. Crystalline structures grew from nothing, their faceted surfaces containing entire libraries of knowledge from civilizations across the galaxy. Most impressively, small moons appeared in stable orbits, their surfaces already equipped with atmospheric processors and infrastructure that could support millions of inhabitants. David's instruments showed that the alien fleet's sensors were overloading trying to process what they were witnessing. The materials being created didn't exist in any database. The energy patterns defied known physics, and the sheer scale of matter manipulation involved should have required resources equivalent to entire star systems. Yet Serenity's Edge accomplished it all while barely drawing on its reserves. Elena continued her explanation, her voice taking on the patient tone of a teacher addressing confused students. These aren't illusions or technological tricks, Admiral. We've learned to work with reality at its most fundamental levels, to convince the universe that what we need already exists. Your empire builds through conquest and consumption, but we've discovered how to build through cooperation with the laws of physics themselves. Lieutenant Corvos, aboard the Dominance Eternal, attempted to scan the newly created objects, hoping to discover some flaw or deception that would explain the impossible display. His instruments returned readings that made no sense. The floating gardens were definitely real, photosynthesizing and growing even as he watched. The crystal libraries contained actual information, their quantum storage systems already integrating with his ship's database protocols. The artificial moons showed geological layers that suggested millions of years of natural development, despite having been created moments before. Admiral Zephin found his voice again, though it carried less of the confident authority that had dominated his earlier communications. He demanded to know how such technologies were possible, what principles governed their operation, and why humanity had kept such capabilities hidden. His questions came rapid fire, driven by a mixture of fear and genuine curiosity that Elena found encouraging. "We didn't hide them," she replied. "We simply didn't announce them. Earth has been developing these technologies for decades, working in cooperation with several other civilizations that your empire hasn't encountered. We've been waiting for the galaxy to mature enough to handle what we've learned. Your empire's expansion has actually been slowing that process, forcing peaceful species to focus on survival rather than growth." The implications hit Zephon like a physical blow. If Earth possessed such capabilities, and if they were allied with other advanced civilizations, then the Empire's expansion had been proceeding through a galaxy containing powers far beyond their understanding. Every world they had conquered, every victory they had celebrated, had been permitted rather than achieved through superior force. Elena seemed to sense his thoughts, her next words carrying a note of sympathy. "The universe is much larger and more wonderful than your empire has allowed itself to discover, Admiral. Your people have great potential, but you've been limiting yourselves to one very narrow path. Would you like to see what else is possible?" Without waiting for an answer, she initiated the final phase of her demonstration. The space around both fleets began to sing, resonating with harmonies that existed at frequencies beyond normal hearing. The sound came not through communication systems, but directly through the quantum field fluctuations that connected all matter and energy in the universe. It was music in the deepest sense, a symphony of creation that invited listeners to participate, rather than simply observe. The effect on the Kethany crew was immediate and profound. Decades of military conditioning began to fade as they experienced beauty on a scale their empire had never encouraged them to imagine. Tactical officers found themselves composing poetry, inspired by the harmonies flowing around them. Weapons specialists began sketching designs for instruments that could add to the cosmic symphony. Even Admiral Zephon felt tears flowing down his scaled cheeks as he realized how much of the universe his people had missed. As the music reached its crescendo, every ship in the Kethany fleet received a data transmission containing star charts unlike anything in their navigation systems. The maps showed not conquest targets or resource locations, but wonders that defied imagination. Nebulae that sang with the voices of extinct civilizations, planets where the very rocks had achieved consciousness and built cities of living crystal. Stellar phenomena that existed as collaborative art projects between species separated by thousands of light years. Elena's voice cut through the music with gentle clarity. "This is what we've been building while your empire has been destroying. Not weapons or defenses, but possibilities. Every world you've conquered had the potential to contribute something unique to this growing symphony of creation. Some of that potential can still be recovered, but much has been lost forever." The communication channel fell silent as both fleets processed the magnitude of what had been revealed. The Kethany Empire, which had seemed so dominant and unstoppable just hours before, now appeared as a small and primitive force stumbling through a universe it barely understood. Their weapons and tactics meant nothing against beings who could rewrite reality through understanding rather than force. Admiral Zephon finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of a man whose entire worldview had been shattered and rebuilt in the span of minutes. He asked the question that would determine his empire's future. "What happens now?" Elena smiled, though he could not see her face. "Now you have a choice. You can continue on your current path, conquering and consuming until you eventually encounter something that decides you've become too dangerous to ignore. Or you can accept our invitation to discover what your people might become if they chose creation over destruction. The universe has room for both approaches, but only one leads to wonder." The Kethany fleet began its withdrawal 3 hours later, not in defeat, but in contemplation. Word of their encounter with humanity spread through their empire and beyond, carried by traders and diplomats who sensed that something fundamental had changed in the balance of galactic power. Some worlds that had submitted to Kethany rule began to question whether their conquerors truly represented the strongest force in the galaxy. Earth remained quiet after the encounter, continuing its patient work of nurturing the technologies that would one day transform the galaxy. But across the stars, in hidden laboratories and secret meeting chambers, other civilizations began to prepare for a future where humanity's invitation to wonder might finally be accepted by beings ready to discover what they could become.